not too long ago, was it 3 years ago, Mzilikazi was arrested by the police. He was seized from his office and arrested by the police for an expose that he did on some shady dealings involving the chief of police. And he's since then done some amazing investigations, which he's going to talk about. So our format today is I'm going to ask the panelists questions, and they are given just 3 minutes each to answer them. Otherwise, I will hit them with this microphone. So for this to be a freewheeling and lively discussion, we're just going to make it no formal presentations, but more like a conversation. So the first question, just to set this conversation going, the first question I'd like to ask our panel is what have been the most interesting and most highest impact investigations that have been done in your region the past year or the past 2 years since the last conference. So let's start from Mzilikazi.
Ladies first? No, I said ladies first.
Oh, Mzilikazi wants to have Rana have the first word. Okay, Rana.
Assalamu alaikum. We've done 180 investigations, and they have all been brilliant. As Arij, we have supported 180 investigations in 9 Arab countries, and they've all been brilliant. Our flagship is an investigation we did together with the BBC. It's called Jordan's Wall of Silence, and it was filmed undercover by a very brave woman who went into centers, private centers, looking after mentally challenged kids and documented the abuses inside those centers, sexual, physical, and verbal. And I would like to show you a brief. Are you ready? Okay, our second investigation came out 2 days ago in Tunisia, and it was by the name Tunisian Quranic Kindergartens are producing a new Wahhabi elite. And the journalist Hanan Zbif went undercover and worked as a trainer in one of those kindergartens and documented for 3 months the kind of brainwashing that's going on inside these kindergartens, where kids were not even showed faces. Okay. This is the investigation on abuses at the mentally challenged private centers. These are the caretakers. This documentary created a huge row in Jordan. The king basically formed a commission, and today all centers have hidden cameras that are monitoring the behavior of these caretakers. It was very controversial when we published it in our society. Some people accused us of being a foreign-funded agency that was trying to discredit Islam, because it so happened that most of the caregivers were veiled women. We said that the journalist herself is veiled, so no offense. We are documenting abuses. Others said that we are hanging the dirty laundry of Jordan in front of a foreign audience. And we said it's better to stop these abuses than to care about showing them. Of course, it's a recorded discussion between this woman that's telling her you have to have some mercy with these kids, and the woman is telling her you cannot have mercy with them, they are abnormal and they can't understand. How do you expect me to keep them in place? I have to beat them and I have to abuse them. Our second investigation is on Quranic kindergartens in Tunis, and I would like to show you the photos, but the journalist also went undercover. Our third one was in Lebanon, and our colleague went undercover and documented how local importers are forging the documents, the import documents, in order to save money for the merchants. And he confronted the main culprit, and it was a very explosive issue because the government also formed 9 committees and some reforms have taken place. The other investigation we did was in Yemen, where worshippers are going into the mosque, walking through pools of water that should be changed every hour, and the water is lying there for 4 days. It's very stale. The worshippers go in and they end up having diseases, skin diseases, fungus, and sometimes diarrhea and dysentery. I'm sorry, there's a technical problem. I had slides for everybody. This is the Quranic schools in Tunis that are producing the Wahhabi elite. If you can see, can you move on, please? Okay, this is how they're teaching them the alphabets. And instead of having simple alphabets, they are using words from the Quran on 3- and 4-year-old children. They're teaching them how to read Quran in a very special way. We have nothing against religion, but these kindergartens were violating the rules and regulations on how to teach in kindergartens. This is how they're reciting the Quran. Of course, she documented everything and nobody ever got into this kindergarten. She risked her life. This is how they show them how to basically paint. But all these features have no nose, no ears, because in Wahhabi, which is a very strict form of Islam, Sunni Islam, and practiced in Saudi Arabia, you should not be showing your features. So some of the students developed severe depression because they thought that they should have no eyes, very young kids. This is how one of the students was drawing her teacher in the school. This is one of the children that's taught how to give the Friday mosque sermon, which is very important. These are again the vowels in Arabic, but used from the way the Quran is spelling them. Can we show them Yemen? Can we show Yemen, please? Yemen, mosques in Yemen. This is the water, and they have to go through it in order to get into the mosque. And I will just show you 1 or 2 skin diseases. We took 10 samples of that water and analyzed it in labs. Okay, more. These are some of the skin diseases. More, please. Okay. I'm going to show you the last one on Riyadh, Lebanon. Riyadh is a journalist for a very leading TV station called Al Jadid, and he's also here with us. Riyadh, can you stand up, please? Hanan is also here with us from Tunis. Can you stand up? Now he's confronting the culprit. It's all undercover, showing how the bribes take place. And the corrupt businessman tried to stop the TV from airing this investigation. He could not. And the last one, which we are also very proud of, is on cheating at Jordanian schools for the National High School exam. And the journalist again, Mus'ab, where are you, Mus'ab? Mus'ab, stand please. Mus'ab pretended to be a student. He took the exam as a student, and he used hidden cameras over 2 semesters and documented how students were manipulating their smartphones. In some cases, there were cars standing outside the school with teachers, replying to the questions, and then people text messaging them. Some people were going to the mosques and shouting the answers to every question in the remote areas. And Mus'ab did a great investigation. The minister tried to intimidate him, but then in the end we just went ahead and published it, and they have rechanged the cheating. So that's it.
You're right. Thank you, Rana. Gustavo, would you like to tell us about what's going on in Latin America? Gustavo will speak in Spanish, so please put your headsets on.
Do you mind if I speak in Spanish? If you insist, I can torture you with my accent in English, but up to you. Español. Okay. Latinoamérica tiene una serie de características, como siempre, es un continente de paradojas y de características extraordinarias. Por ejemplo, en el índice de riesgo del Comité para la Protección de Periodistas, el Risk Index del CPJ, dos de los países que están en el tope de la lista, aunque sea por orden alfabético, son Ecuador y Brasil. Sin embargo, el país que Julian Assange escogió para asilarse es Ecuador. Y el país desde el que Graham Greenwald escribe para The Guardian no es en el Reino Unido precisamente, sino Brasil. ¿Qué quiere decir eso en términos de libertades comparativas? Me imagino que necesita algún análisis mayor. Pero en términos de la producción de periodismo de investigación, diré de que pese a que muchas de las características estructurales conspiran en contra de una buena producción de periodismo investigativo, las crisis que afectan a los periódicos tradicionales en todo el mundo, y añádase a eso problemas propios de Latinoamérica, patrones con conflictos de intereses, ahora grandes problemas de concentración de la propiedad de los medios, propiedades cruzadas, conflictos poderosos de interés en los propietarios, en incluso algunos medios que son fundamentales en América Latina, como por ejemplo El Tiempo en Colombia. A pesar de eso, ha habido una producción consistente de muy buen periodismo de investigación. El Instituto de Prensa y Sociedad, IPYS, todos los años hace un premio para los mejores trabajos de periodismo de investigación, y ellos, comparados con cualquier estándar mundial, han sido, por lo general, extraordinarios. Desde el primer trabajo, que fue el de un nicaragüense, Jorge Loáziga, que expuso toda la trama de corrupción del expresidente de Nicaragua, Arnoldo Alemán, y que tuvo un efecto muy fuerte. Los reportajes que en Costa Rica sacó La Nación a través de su periodista Janina Cegnini, que también expusieron la corrupción en Costa Rica de por lo menos 2 expresidentes de La Nación que terminaron en la cárcel como resultado de eso. La investigación que acaba de sacar la prensa de Panamá sobre negocios corruptos entre el presidente Roberto Martinelli con el ex gobernante de Italia, Silvio Berlusconi, y con otras compañías italianas. Y no solamente en términos de la corrupción de gobierno, también en muchas otras cosas. Las investigaciones que sacaron los medios colombianos sobre la parapolítica, es decir, la infiltración de los intereses vinculados con las organizaciones paramilitares en Colombia, con la política nacional, con la apropiación masiva de algunas de las tierras más ricas e importantes de Colombia, y con la impunidad y los asesinatos masivos, incluidas campañas de exterminio político, han sido notables y han permitido sacar a la luz muchas cosas y llevar adelante, además, procesos judiciales. Lo que en El Salvador hizo el Faro hace poco, que fue sacar y revelar el pacto que se había dado entre el gobierno de El Salvador con las principales grupos de crimen organizado, las maras, las 2 principales maras de la nación, para bajar los índices de violencia por dándoles a contrapartida un régimen especial a los principales jefes en las cárceles. Eso no solo fue furiosamente negado por tanto el gobierno como las maras, sino seguido por una verdadera avalancha de amenazas en las cuales el gobierno incluso renunció a proteger a los periodistas del Faro, que por fortuna han podido hasta este momento mantener su integridad en todo sentido y además han podido lograr la total corroboración de lo que ellos dijeron. Pero no solamente eso, en Brasil, aquí, por alguna razón que merece un análisis, seguramente va a ser analizada mejor, ha habido un florecimiento de periodismo de investigación que ha tenido una inmensa variedad. Desde reportajes sobre la corrupción en el fútbol, un asunto que quizá aquí sea tan importante o más que la política, hasta otros reportajes como los que se han dado simultáneamente en varios lados, corrupción en las casas que acuñan la moneda, o en los estados, como por ejemplo en Paraná, un reciente reportaje sobre el abandono, la corrupción de la policía, en la cual se ejecutan gastos presupuestales para estaciones policiales y fuerzas fantasmas que no son existentes y que a la vez también supuso un grado considerable de valentía ante las amenazas que hubo. De tal manera, CIPER en Chile, a su turno, que hizo un excelente reportaje hace poco tiempo sobre fraudes masivos en universidades privadas, que es uno de los temas más importantes y menos tocados hasta ahora en América Latina, cómo se aprovecha el inmenso deseo de educación y de mejoría de las clases emergentes para estafarlas en forma masiva y convertir a las universidades, entre otras cosas, en vehículos de lavados de bienes adquiridos de forma normal. De tal manera que en su conjunto, en toda América Latina, a la vez de que hay casos generalizados y deplorables de pésimo periodismo, a la vez que muchos de los medios fundamentales, los medios de referencia, han renunciado a llevar adelante su trabajo y su misión periodística, han surgido desde medios tradicionales en algunos casos y desde medios digitales, medios de periodismo sin fines de lucro, en muchos otros casos en una forma creciente, corrientes muy fuertes que han llevado y llevan a cabo notas de investigación que tienen un efecto importante y remecedor, que sin embargo no son lo suficiente como para alcanzar una masa crítica que permita luchar sostenidamente contra la corrupción, pero que en buena medida son hasta ahora la principal voz de la sociedad civil.
David, tell us about Europe. Lots of interesting stories there.
Okay, this one works, I think. Well, I work at The Guardian in London, and it's true that unlike my distinguished colleagues to the left and right, I haven't been arrested, nor any of us at The Guardian have yet been arrested. But I should tell you that when I left London, there was plenty of talk from the British authorities that they would like to arrest reporters from The Guardian. So we've been doing things that have been a little bit dangerous. It is not an exaggeration to say that in the last 3 years, there's been a new era has opened up in investigative journalism. And we've been at the heart of it at The Guardian in London. And this new era is about two things. It's about mass digital leaking, and it's about mass international cooperation among investigative journalists. We've been engaged in 3 different stories that have involved mass digital leaking and mass international cooperation. The first, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with, is WikiLeaks. It's 3 years ago now that I think that story started at an investigative journalism conference in Norway run by Scoop when Julian Assange first appeared and astonished us all by showing us the video he had obtained of the Apache helicopter shooting of civilian Reuters employees in Baghdad. Following that, as you will recall, Julian Assange agreed to turn over to The Guardian and to collaborating newspapers, the New York Times and Spiegel in Germany, and ultimately IPYS in Le Monde, the massive data dump which had been passed to him by the junior American soldier, Private Manning, who has subsequently been sentenced to 35 years in jail. That data dump, which was almost 2 gigabytes of military and diplomatic data, presented us with unique problems and unique opportunities. So we had to learn at high speed how to process material that was so huge. We had to learn how to search it, we had to learn how to turn it into stories, and we had to learn how to separate what it was in the public interest to publish from what should not be published. And it was a process that led to a good many arguments and rows along the way. At the time, a lot of interest focused on the personality of Julian Assange. But I believed then, and I think history has shown me in this at least to be right, that what WikiLeaks showed was not anything about the personality of Julian Assange. It showed that there's been a shift in technology which is going to cause a shift in journalism. Because these mass databases come into existence, they are able to be leaked, and they're able to be leaked around the world at the click of a mouse. So, right after the WikiLeaks saga, it happened again. This time, it started at the GIJC conference in Kiev, the last one, when Gerard Breil from ICIJ got together with people and explained he was in possession of a huge data dump of leaked material about offshore companies. If we thought WikiLeaks was big, this was enormous. This wasn't 2 gigabytes, it was 200 gigabytes. Presented a whole new series of problems about how you would search data taken from the internal files of offshore incorporation companies in the British Virgin Islands and turn it into exposure stories. That process took more than a year. In fact, that process is still going on because it's generated some extraordinary exposures of politicians all over the world setting up offshore companies to hide money in. And I'm sure that we're going to hear a lot more about that at the conference this weekend. The third big digital leak was, of course, the most recent one by Edward Snowden, the NSA contractor, who managed to scrape from the databases, the top secret databases of the National Security Agency, thousands and thousands of documents which he has transmitted to The Guardian and to other newspapers and which are causing sensations around the world as we speak. There, only part of the problem was about how to search the data, which was smaller than the offshore ones, and relatively easy to search with the sort of specialized software we're having to get used to. The problem has really been the political one that it's made governments very angry. As you know, Snowden is now in hiding in Moscow because the American government wants to prosecute him under the Espionage Act. In Britain, my own paper, The Guardian, has been repeatedly threatened now with prosecution and has been forced indeed to destroy one copy of the documents it got, and agents of British intelligence stood over the editor of The Guardian while he ground up hard drives with an angle grinder. And it hasn't saved The Guardian from repeated threats of prosecution. So this is a new era, and I think we're going to see a lot more of this.
Mzilikazi, can we hear from you?
Afternoon. I come from South Africa and working for the Sunday Times Investigations Unit with my 2 colleagues, Rob Rose and Stefan Hofstadter. Over the past 3 years, we've done some good stories. Like I'll take you back in 2010. We exposed the former police national commissioner for being involved in a 1.7 billion rand lease scandal. Basically, the commissioner wanted to move the current police headquarters into a building, into 2 buildings owned by a businessman who's close to the president of the country. They did this, they tried to do this without following the correct procedure like tendering, open tender and stuff like that. And they tried to use the World Cup as their excuse, basically saying we need to move into this building before the World Cup starts because the World Cup we need to be in a very strategic building and stuff like that. But the problem with that is that South Africa has been aware that the World Cup was coming for years. So you couldn't use it 3 months before the World Cup to move into a building and say we can't go through tenders because the World Cup is just around the corner. We just have to move everyone like that. 3 days after we published the first story, I was arrested, charged with on transport charges, basically kidnapped from my office and taken to more than 300 kilometers away from my office without the knowledge of my boss, my lawyer, or my family. And I later sued the state after I was released, and the state decided to settle the matter out of court. The story won the Tego Kepa Investigative Journalism Award, which is like the top investigative journalism award in South Africa. And it's also won the Vodacom Journalist of the Year, South African Store of the Year, also won us the Vodacom Journalist of the Year. And then in 2011, we exposed our former Minister of Corporate Affairs. The minister had a girlfriend who was an air hostess, and she got arrested in Switzerland for possession and dealing with drugs. The minister used taxpayers' money to go to Switzerland to go and visit the girlfriend. He flew first class. He went there with his PA. The amount they spent there was more than 300,000 just to go and see his girlfriend in prison. Again, he used the World Cup as an excuse. He said he was going to Switzerland to go and check on how they did the World Cup stuff. And but we later found out that when he was in Switzerland, he never did anything official except going to prison 3 times to go and visit his girlfriend. We're so unfortunate that the PA that he took along with him to Switzerland started talking after some time. She told us, I went there. There was nothing that I did as a PA. All he did was to go there and visit the girlfriend who was in prison for drug dealing. Before I finish on this story, on our first story when we exposed the National Commissioner, the President of the country was forced to start a commission of inquiry, and that commission concluded that the National Commissioner was not fit to hold office and he was fired. And a second story of the minister went to Switzerland to visit his girlfriend. He was investigated by the public protector, and the public protector came to the same conclusion as our story, that he did go to Switzerland. There was nothing official about it. He just went there to visit his girlfriend who was in prison, and she recommended that he must be charged. But unfortunately, the minister died before he can be punished for his sins. In 2012, we exposed the former Minister of Communication. Basically, what happened is the minister, when she took over as the new minister in 2011 late, she realized that she needed an ICT Indaba where all the telecom communicators will come together all over the world just to come and discuss the status and the way forward of IT in South Africa. there was a company that was contracted to do the job, and then she forced the director of that company to subcontract a company owned by her own boyfriend, who benefited millions of rands in the whole deal. We exposed the deal and showed how the boyfriend benefited. Basically, days after the boyfriend was subcontracted to the deal, the directors of the company that legally got the tender were forced to surrender the signing rights to their bank account to the boyfriend. We used to withdraw money any time that he wanted, and he used some of the money to buy the minister Louis Vuitton shoes in Europe, and same money that was meant for the ICT in Daba, and the minister was indirectly benefiting from the shoes and some of the trips that she took along with the boyfriend around the world. Another story that we exposed at the same time in 2010, which it started around the time when I was arrested. Days after I was released from jail, I got a phone call from a police officer in the police head office who wanted to know why I was arrested, just to sit down and explain to him, because they wanted to see what exactly was happening, because no one understood or knew what was happening. My colleague Stefan and I went to Pretoria to meet with these police officers, and they asked us, why were you arrested? And I told them, I don't know. And no one really seemed to know exactly why I'm arrested. And they asked one question that gave us a very big story. They asked, are you guys by any means investigating the National Police Commissioner hit squad? And then we started asking, what hit squad? They said, no, the commissioner has got a hit squad operating in KZN. And we said, we're not aware of that. And then they said, speak to the former provincial commissioner in KZN. You'll tell you more information about it. We went down to Durban with my colleague. We met the former provincial police commissioner, who confirmed to a certain extent that there was indeed a hit squad operating in the area. Basically, police will arrest people who have been suspected of being bank robbers and stuff. That instead of arresting them, they just shoot them. And we were told that at a certain extent, some of the police officers were benefiting financially from the deal, from killing those people. The provincial commissioner referred us to a human rights activist in the province, a woman by the name of Mary Diaz, who said she has documented every single killing that happened in this process. We met with Mary Diaz. She came to the meeting with 4 taxi owners, because most of the people that were being killed were taxi owners and taxi drivers. Mary came to the meeting with 4 taxi owners and taxi drivers who confirmed that some of their colleagues were being killed because they were belonging to a rival taxi association. Most of the people that were killed were belonging to one taxi industry, and there were some elements that the other taxi industry was being controlled or owned by relatives of the president of the country. And one taxi driver who came to that meeting with a message that was left on his phone by one of the police officers, who was telling him that I'm looking for you and I'm coming down, I'm going to hunt you down and I'm going to kill you. We asked the taxi owner to phone that police officer in our presence. He put him on a speakerphone. The police officer repeated the same thing, that I'm looking for you, I'm going to hunt you down and I'm going to kill you. The guy said, why don't you want to arrest me? He said, no, it takes time. If I arrest you, you have to go to jail. You might be acquitted and stuff like that. It's better I kill you and the case closed. So those are some of the stories that we have done over the past 3 years, and they've caused a lot of debate, a lot of controversy, and we've been criticized by the government, by our own colleagues, and by those who wanted to protect the truth.
Thank you. So we've seen actually very different types of investigations conducted in many different types of media markets and political regimes. You've seen the differences, for example, between the kinds of stories that Abraji does in the Middle East and the types of stories that are being done in Latin America, and the unique challenges facing, you know, this massive data leak. So I would like to ask whether we can keep to the 3-minute limit. I will ask, and I realize this is impossible, I will ask 3 short questions, and can we have brief answers first from each of you. So my first question is, given the constraints and limitations that you've all talked about, do you see the space for watchdog reporting expanding or constricting in your area? Second, are there taboo topics? Are there topics you cannot touch? Or even if you can, are those topics, you know, very risky and make you vulnerable to attack or any other form of retaliation? And third, how do you go around these taboos? So let's scramble it around a bit and maybe ask Gustavo to speak first in whatever language you prefer. English. 3 minutes. English is short.
No. She says English is shorter. I disagree with that, and I am, because of that, going to speak in Spanish. ¿Qué se puede hacer para poder llevar a cabo un buen periodismo de investigación en circunstancias difíciles de seguridad? Primero, la respuesta que han tenido que hacerse en muchos casos. Uno, cuando hay circunstancias de amenaza, ¿debe renunciar o no debe renunciar a hacer un periodismo fuerte de investigación? Para mí la respuesta es clara. Uno jamás debe renunciar a hacer eso. Si uno hace periodismo, debe hacerlo bien y debe hacerlo hasta el final. En México, si alguien dio el ejemplo clarísimo de lo que hay que hacer, fue Blanco Ornelas, el director y fundador de la revista Z en Tijuana, que enfrentado al peor tipo de amenazas que costó la muerte de varios periodistas, incluso sus colegas en la dirección, y que lo tuvo a él al borde de la muerte, no renunció jamás. Y por lo contrario, habiendo sobrevivido, hizo cada vez más un periodismo más profundo, más fuerte, más de fondo. Y dio un gran ejemplo que en su propio país, en México, debiera ser seguido en todos los casos. Porque la respuesta es clara. Cuando hay intimidación y uno cede a ella, eventualmente esta solamente se acrecienta. En el momento en que se ve que ha tenido resultados, esta se acrecienta. Entonces, si uno decide ir adelante, la pregunta es, ¿cómo hacer para, repitiendo a García Márquez, vivir para contarlo? En América Latina, de nuevo, la situación es difícil. Las medidas de seguridad que toman la mayor parte de los medios grandes para defender a sus periodistas, si se tratara de otra industria, digamos, de la construcción, de industria minera, las autoridades multarían a los dueños hasta sacarlos del negocio, básicamente, por el inmenso nivel de negligencia que hay. En México, ya que estamos hablando de México, una periodista joven, pero ya célebre, fue mandada por su medio, en esta ocasión no lo voy a mencionar por pudor, a Ciudad Juárez, sin ninguna preparación previa, sin ninguna inteligencia, y para alojarse en un hotel con el que tenían un convenio publicitario en Ciudad Juárez, donde estaba alojada la Policía Federal. De tal manera de que ella estuvo ahí desde el comienzo. Ese tipo de negligencia criminal es una de las causas por las que se produce el número tan elevado de víctimas como hay. El otro, por supuesto, es la corrupción y el tercero es la cobardía. Entonces, cuando desgraciadamente en América Latina, en la mayor parte de los medios grandes, se produce una amenaza, lo que sucede es que se contrata guardaespaldas, pero para los dueños, no para los periodistas. Cuando empezó a haber amenazas en México, por ejemplo, y sigo con el tema porque es uno de los lugares más peligrosos en el mundo, el dueño de Reforma, principal periódico de México, Se fue con su familia e incluso creó su mascota a Austin, Texas, pero los periodistas quedaron y no hubo ninguna mejoría en términos reales de seguridad. ¿Qué es respecto a eso lo que hay que hacer? Lo que en mi caso, con la experiencia lograda a través de los años, lo que creo es, básicamente, es un do-it-yourself security. La seguridad de que los propios periodistas estén en posibilidad de organizar. Buscar de darles el mayor entrenamiento posible en seguridad. Como ustedes saben, la mayor parte de casi todos los asesinatos y las muertes que ha habido a nivel mundial en periodismo, la abrumadora mayoría no son de corresponsales extranjeros, de periodistas expedicionarios, sino de gente que está trabajando en sus propios países. Y los que reciben entrenamiento son los periodistas extranjeros y generalmente no los nacionales. Y los niveles de impunidad que hay para ese tipo de asesinatos son casi del 90 y tantos % en la mayor parte de los casos. Entonces, ante eso, la respuesta y lo que tiene que hacerse también en forma de tratar de darle mucho más recursos son entrenamientos designados en forma específica para los periodistas que trabajan en sus propios países en coberturas de largo aliento a lo largo de los años, sin grandes recursos económicos y que necesitan apelar a todas las medidas más prácticas. Yo les puedo decir que en el caso del medio que dirijo, una parte fundamental de nuestro trabajo es el entrenamiento en seguridad. Algunas veces es obligatorio, algunas veces no les gusta a los periodistas que trabajan conmigo porque entrenarse en defensa personal, entrenarse en tactical awareness y en todas esas cosas a veces no es todo lo grato del mundo, pero a la hora de la hora creo de que ese conocimiento puede ser sumamente importante. Ninguna de estas cosas es una solución mágica, pero por lo menos ayuda mucho a tener mejores condiciones. Y por supuesto, el tener redes internacionales capaces de responder en forma rápida y eficaz.
Thank you. David, you face different kinds of threats. There are no narco traffickers pointing guns to your head. How do you protect yourself against online surveillance and the NSA? Is it even possible to do that?
Well, I've never in the past bothered very much about online surveillance or having my phone tapped or all that, because I think that it's a world of paranoia which just makes your job difficult. And most of the time, I think the best thing to do is to just shrug and assume that if people are going to spy on you and surveil you, they will, and there's not a lot you can do about it. If you do need to do something about it, there's two different approaches. On the one hand, you've got the sort of WikiLeaks Snowden approach, which is to heavily encrypt everything and have very elaborate encrypted email conversations using PGP and TrueCrypt and so forth, which frankly, I'm not very technical and it makes my head hurt. The other way to do it is the way the old Russian KGB used to do it, which I think is more sensible, which is if you're going to do something very secret, go right down to the bottom of the technological tree and leave messages in hollow trees, you know, meet people personally, don't use electronic communications. So those would be my thoughts on that.
What about you, Mzilikazi? I mean, you've been threatened, you've been arrested, you've been beaten up as well, right? You can defend yourself, it looks like it to me, but what do you do?
I think the basic thing, it doesn't matter how rich or poor the organization or a publication is. You need a journalist or a team of journalists who are determined, courageous, and fearless. You can have all the money in the world, but if you are not courageous, you won't have guts to do an investigation. You can work for the most poorest organization in the world, but if you have the guts, the courage, you can go out all day and do a bigger investigation. I started my career as a journalist working for a small news agency in Nelspruit, African IPYS. We didn't have big resources, and we're winning all sorts of awards because we're courageous. Justin Arenstein, who's in this room, He was like our mentor, giving us courage to see, guys, it doesn't matter we are small or we don't have big resources, but as long as we are determined to go all out and go and do those stories, just go out and give it your best shot. The issue, again, is journalists must not underestimate their enemies. That's the biggest downfall. As much as you are out there, you've got your publication or maybe lawyers behind you, but the state is also watching you. And they'll do all kind of clandestine things, like hacking your phones illegally, which they've done to me and my colleagues, like following you around, threatening all sorts of things against you, getting people just to smear you in public and privately. The other day I was having a discussion with an editor of one of the newspapers, and he said to me, you know, journalism has become more dangerous these days. And I said to the editor, I said, you see, one thing that is very sad, what makes journalism more dangerous these days, it's like most journalists are being assassinated every day with smear campaigns, malicious propaganda, and the most saddest part of it is that the snipers themselves and our own colleagues were being used to attack you, to attack your integrity, because those publications have got interest because you might have exposed their source of funding, their friends, their colleagues, and all of that. But you need a publication or an institution that will protect you as a journalist. When you go all out, you know, if you get arrested, your editor will wake up at 12 o'clock midnight, go and force the magistrate or a judge to hear your case and make sure that you don't sleep in police custody.
Rana, the Middle East is very different. At least South Africa and most countries in Latin America, there are legal and constitutional protections for press freedom, and there is much more leeway. There is a long-established tradition of press freedom. So, can you talk about the specific difficulties you face in countries which are not quite democratic and where there is yet no tradition of a free press?
I would just like to talk about coming from a region which does not have any social, political, or even societal support for the work of a journalist. In Jordan, for example, we do have a law that allows you to access information, but we keep laughing about it and we call it the law that makes it difficult to access information. The same in Tunis and the same in Yemen. Before coming here, Jordanian authorities arrested 3 activists and charged them with trying to undermine the regime because they were arrested and they checked their smartphones, they went into their WhatsApp accounts, and they found messages critical of the king and of the Egyptian president. So the problem was, they just accused them of trying to undermine relations with a brotherly state and their own regime. So we really live in a state of no stability. But the worst thing that I think, in the last 3 years of this so-called Arab Spring has been that media before the Arab Spring was very much controlled by the state, and you had a few exceptions of, independent, pro-democracy, opposition newspapers, and they had a very clear agenda. During the revolution and after that, we had a major power swept to the seats, and that's the Muslim Brotherhood. So what has happened after the revolution is even more ugly and oppressive, because on the one hand, you had state media, which now became totally the propaganda tool of those in power, which in Egypt and in Tunis, for example, were the Muslim Brotherhood. And you also had an explosion of media, and mostly it was either pro-Muslim Brotherhood, and they were making devils and criminals out of everybody else on the other side, or you had the rich businessmen who were, trying to undermine the Islamists and the other nationalist media that was trying to undermine the Islamists, and we entered into a huge, huge war of disinformation. One of our colleagues here, Hisham Allam. Hisham, can you stand please? Hisham used to work as head of the investigative unit at Al-Watan newspaper in Egypt, and he eventually had to resign from his paper 3 months ago because his chief editor, who is supposedly a very modern and pro-democracy guy, was insisting that Hisham and all his team start becoming, witnesses on the wrong side. He wanted him to basically criticize the Muslim Brotherhood, criticize everybody that was not backing the military coup in Egypt. I have Yahya Ghanem. Yahya, can you stand up, please? Yahya Ghanem is one of Egypt's most respectful journalists with a 30-year career experience. Yahya Ghanem overnight became a victim of his own media and a victim of the political tension between Washington and the military council that was running Egypt. Yahya was naive enough to go and start procedures to set up a local chapter for ICFJ in Cairo. He followed the rules, but then Egypt and the military council went into big trouble, and Yahya and a group of local and international employees of various media houses ended up accused of trying to undermine the regime and the security, and they were even accused of being the spies of the West. Now, the Americans cut a deal with the Egyptians, and the Westerners were all evacuated. Yahya ended up sitting in jail. Yahya, can you stand up again? He was put in jail with rapists and drug addicts. He couldn't even go and pee. He had to stand on his feet for 6 hours. And instead of having a media comradeship from among journalists that were supposedly, even investigative journalists, they ended up, accusing Yahya of being a spy, a mercenary, and you had a media war on Yahya from all the established chief editors that wanted to be in bed with the military council. As a result, today, Yahya is living in Washington. He has to reappeal. To reappeal, it means he has to go back to Egypt. Going back to Egypt means you will never ever have a free trial, and he will end up having to pay the price for that. So it's a very different dynamic. We talk about, on paper, all Arab governments look very good in the eyes of the West, like Jordan. We did the FOI because the donors wanted that, not because the journalists wanted it. Today we have it, and nobody is critical. Our country, for example, locked up these people for WhatsApp, and nobody has uttered a word of condemnation. And we continue to see the West very much interested in stabilizing dictatorships at the expense of, public freedoms and the values of today's life. The things that we cannot really report on actually are intelligence matters. Sometimes the Muslim Brotherhood, sometimes the kings and the presidents. And this is where I think we could do cross-border collaboration and have the foreign media take our stories and broadcast them or publish them, and then have the local press pick it up. This is one way of doing it. And the other way is basically to create coalitions with local journalists, with members of parliament and NGOs that back and stand up for these causes that we are trying to do. It's a difficult battle. Sometimes we feel it's like driving a cart with a donkey up a hill. The minute you stop, the cart is going to fall back on you. But, when I see all the Arabs that are here with me today, I think we are here. We want to make a difference in our own cultures, and we want to become the benchmark for accountability journalism.
I will turn over the questions to you in the audience, but I just want David to tell us a little more about what he means when we're entering into this new era for global investigative journalism, a new era with massive data leaks, massive online collaboration. This is really a new stage. What does it mean? Are we up to it?
Well, I think the first thing to say is I believe that we're living in a golden age of investigative journalism. Compared to when I started out as a young reporter more than 30 years ago, there's an amazing richness of information which is possible to get now. You know, you've got to imagine the younger ones among your world where there weren't any databases, where you had to find out things the hard way, and where what you found out was always very localized. What the common theme of all these massive database leaks has been is that there is now a huge quantity of information whose significance is actually not just national and not just international, but global. All these things I was talking about, WikiLeaks, the offshore leaks, and Snowden's intelligence leaks, they've all got a global significance. So there's two challenges that we've got to face as investigative journalists. One is to get sophisticated technically so that we can learn how to process these databases. I've been on a very steep learning curve about software that enables you to digest and search these things. And the second thing we've got to do, and I can't overemphasize this too much, is collaborate internationally. The WikiLeaks disclosures ended up with 5 major newspapers publishing simultaneously. Same thing happened on a similar scale with offshore leaks, and it's now happened again with Snowden and the NSA leaks, which have been published primarily by The Guardian, but also by the media in Brazil here, and in the New York Times and the Washington Post, and in other global media. Because to get the best out of these stories, you've got to extract the global significance of them. The offshore leaks, there have been literally dozens of journalists from all over the world were called in to work on the local aspects of those stories. So, just one final point about the virtue of collaboration. We've found it's absolutely essential when you're doing these big leaks which make governments unprecedentedly angry, you get a lot of protection by simultaneous publication in different jurisdictions. That's the reason why I think The Guardian, for example, has not yet been arrested for what they did, because the New York Times did it simultaneously. Same story about WikiLeaks. So you get a lot of protection by working together.
Thank you. I'd like to end on this somewhat hopeful note, and thank you to our panelists and to our audience for their questions.